Welcome to my 277th video on my work with OO gauge. In this video I'll be taking a look at a couple of items that I picked up recently to perhaps help out on the bench with servicing locomotives. A cradle for holding locomotive models while servicing from Prozes, and a Hornby rolling road. Here are both of the items as I obtained them. Both boxed, but not actually new. I picked up the Prozes Cradle at a local train show. It wasn't really something that I was looking for at all, but I thought that it looked sort of interesting and might possibly be useful. It has a $45 price tag on it, but I believe the vendor accepted an offer of $40. The Prozes brand has always confused me a bit. I see that this cradle is also branded as Bachmann above the barcode at bottom left, and it was made in Turkey. And here's the box for the rolling road. I bought this as a used item from Rails of Sheffield. It would come new, I believe, with 3 rollers, as shown in the box illustration. Mine came with 5 rollers, so presumably the previous owner bought an extra 2-pack at some point. If you've seen my previous videos, you'll know that I've been using rolling road arrangements of a sort for quite a while, an H&M Loco tester and DCC rollers. Honestly, I always felt that this Hornby rolling road looked to be the best around, but it's rather expensive. The current RRP is £119.99. And that's just with 3 rollers. The twin pack of extra rollers has a current RRP of £22.75. So if I'd bought mine new, I would have been looking at £142.74 plus shipping. Mine was £59.50 used from Rails, and at that price I thought that it was worth going for. I'll cover the Loco cradle first, as it's been sitting around for longer. Here's what I saw when I opened the box. And here is the info sheet that came with it. Not really much in the way of instructions. Here are all of the parts unpacked on the bench. It actually came more assembled than I expected. Here's the section of the sheet showing a picture of the cradle in use and providing what there is in the way of instruction. German and English are the only languages used, so is this particularly targeted at the German market? Here are the contents of the parts bag, mostly just some alternative Loco support pieces intended for O-gauge locos according to the sheet, plus adhesive rubber pieces to cushion the supports. The one oddity was the little red cylinder. Here you can see where those long supports are designated as being for O-gauge. Not quite sure how that is supposed to work, as there isn't any illustration of that, and I don't have space for O-gauge, so I'm probably not going to find out. Looking at the assembled parts of the cradle, I saw where it appeared the little red cylinder should fit. You can see the hole just above the yellow gear there, and there's already a red cylinder in the other side of that hole. The other cradle end had red cylinders in both sides of the hole. So I pushed the loose red cylinder into place in that hole. Note that you can see clearly here the sliding black button and its attached piece, and that can engage with the gear to hold the cradle in a particular position, preventing rotation. Clearly, the long rectangular rod was supposed to go through the slots in the gears so as to turn both gears at the same time. However, if I positioned the 2 cradle ends at the same angle, I couldn't push the rod through as the slots didn't line up. Here you can see that. With both cradle ends at the same angle, the slot in the far gear is at a completely different angle to the end of the rod. I wanted to adjust the cradles so that the slots in the gears would line up when the 2 ends were at the same angle. It wasn't possible to change the engagement of the gear without some disassembly. I decided to undo the nuts and bolts holding the sides together. That should allow me to disengage the gear and then to re-engage it in the position that I wanted. Here I've got the bolts out of the near end and I'm re-engaging the gear, with the rod now through both gears and both ends at the same angle. So then I put the bolts back in whilst keeping the gear engaged. And there is the cradle reassembled, with the two ends now lined up the way I felt they should be. It might have been possible to do this adjustment just by pulling the little red cylinders out of their holes, as those run in slots to keep the arc down and engaged with the gear, but the little red cylinders were very tight in their holes and hard to get hold of, so I thought it was safer just to undo the bolts. And here is the cradle with a loco in it, specifically a 008F. Really, this cradle is not all that suitable for steam engines, which are what I almost exclusively work on. It can be made to work, as here, but steam engines don't really have enough flat surfaces that the holders can fit against conveniently, and tender engines would have to be detached from their tenders to use this cradle, whereas I can put them in a sponge with a tender attached. This cradle is really intended more for diesels and electrics, I assume. For me, as someone who works almost exclusively on steam engines, I don't see a lot of point in this, really. I mean, yes, if you adjust the things, you can get it. Oh, I think I've got there's a thing down. There's a little black thing here. You see that engages with the gear. So when you've got that engaged, it won't turn. It'll stay at a particular position. And if we disengage that, famous last words, I'm trying not to drop the engine. I don't know. I can sort of turn the engine, as it were, you see, except for some reason it doesn't seem to want to go very far. It's getting stuck going this way, I don't know why. I don't think it's a lot of use anyway, but we'll see if we can figure out why it's getting stuck there. Well, there didn't seem to be any actual very sensible reason why it wouldn't turn further. It's just the gears are not great. The plastic gears tend to get a bit stuck if you're I'm trying to do it one-handed as well. So, yes, if you adjust these, you adjust these holders on the ends right so that they support your engine as best you can, but it's a bit hard to find good places to support, of course, with a steam engine. But you do what you can. Yeah, then an individual engine, but I mean, I can't see. See, it's doing this getting stuck thing again. If I push it down better, it turns better, but it should be holding itself down, supposedly, and that's what those red things are supposed to do. Those little red bits run in the grooves to hold it down, but they don't hold it very accurately, so it gets stuck sometimes. I think it might be more useful to you if you're doing a lot of work on, diesels with basically square bodies and no tenders. For me, I'm afraid it's probably going to go back in its box and not get used much, because I can't see what it would do for me. Yes, well, if I really want to mount something so I can turn it at weird angles, yes, but if I just want to mount something to hold something upside down, it's a lot easier to put it in a sponge, which is what I've been doing. Anyway, there we go. We'll see. I am not sure. I've got it to the point where I think I could use it if I want to now. I doubt I actually will use it, but we'll see. Now onto the rolling road. Just for comparison, before I work with the Hornby rolling road, let me just show the other rolling road approach that I've been using recently with an H&M Loco tester and DCC Concepts rollers. The H&M tester did come with rollers of its own, as seen here, but I found that those little brass rollers didn't really work at all well. Each brass roller set has an insulated side and a non-insulated side, so to get power from both rails you have to put some rollers one way round and some the other way round, so both rails get at least one non-insulated contact. But the rollers didn't stay in contact with the rails well, and given that often only one roller would be passing power from one of the rails, power frequently failed to get through. The rollers just didn't sit very stably on the rails. There were foam strips along the wooden sides which were supposed to hold the rollers in place, but I found those more of a nuisance than an asset, as they tended to push the rollers up out of position, or at least out of contact with the rail. Fairly soon after I first tried the H&M tester, I gave up on its own brass rollers and bought a set of DCC rollers. These are designed to work directly on track, basically. The DCC rollers consist of metal side pieces with rollers on proper ball bearings, with the rollers for the two sides connected by a plastic piece. The set comes with plastic separators, as seen here, which allow the rollers to be used with pretty much all standard gauges from N gauge to EM gauge. I found that the DCC rollers worked quite well with the H&M tester base, making good contact with the rails, and with each roller set connecting power from both sides. However, fitting the rollers into place on the track and then getting the Loco onto the rollers without knocking one or other of the rollers out of place was quite fiddly. And of course the rollers didn't lock in place at all, so if you took the Loco off, the rollers would tend to move and you'd have to fiddle to get the Loco back on again with the rollers properly positioned. Here's a little demo of that setup working from my last video featuring a 003 Rail 8F. This is definitely not the best Loco testing system, but it works up to a point. We got the 8F there on the DCC rollers. There's one DCC roller loose, but what he's got there, that's what the DCC rollers are like, and he's got his DCC rollers underneath him there, and we've got the one side of the power connected to the track and the other side connected to the wire that comes out of the back of the Loco that would go to the tender. So that's the center rail power. And as it gets getting warmed up a bit, I see it's starting to go a bit faster here. Now that is fairly high power. That's 70% power on this bench controller, which is a fairly powerful controller. That's down to 60% power. That's not bad. I mean, he doesn't seem to be, I won't say he's a great runner, but he doesn't seem to be too bad a runner. Here's the Hornby rolling road out of its box as I got it. 5 rollers were fitted, but one end of the supporting block was not attached. Obviously that supporting block is supposed to run in the slot attached by screws at each end, but one of the screws had come out. The rolling road was in a plastic bag inside its box, and when I took it out of the bag, something fell onto the floor, presumably the screw for attaching the end of the block, but I couldn't find it at first. There was a little instruction sheet that came with the rolling road showing how to add extra rollers. I didn't need to add rollers, but I assumed that I would need to get inside the base of the rolling road to reattach the supporting block properly. As instructed, I pried off the end cap with a screwdriver. I was then able to see inside. So far as the supporting block was concerned, it was screwed to a plastic plate underneath. There was another hole at the other end of the plastic plate, but of course that other screw was missing at this point. With the end cap off, you can also see how the individual rollers run on metal rods on either side, and the screws that tighten the rollers into place tighten onto those rods. Power is passed through those rods to the rollers on either side. The frame of the rolling road, although it appears to be metal, doesn't conduct electricity. At this point I had another search on the floor and I managed to find the missing screw. I managed to screw the other end of the block back to the plastic plate by pushing the plate up into position from below with a flat of tweezers inserted into the end. Then I fitted the end cap back into place. I tried the rolling road with a 002 Rail 8F. 4 rollers on each side are positioned under the driving wheels and the supporting block is placed under the front pony truck. I initially connected power using crocodile clips to both rails. There are sprung contacts on the end of the rolling road with the little orange buttons, and you could connect the power wires to those. The tender is sitting up on the rail section and could pick up power from those rails, although this particular tender doesn't. Here's a close-up of how the Loco is sitting on the rollers. This is quite a stable arrangement. You do have to adjust the rollers on each side separately, as there's no connection between the rollers on the 2 sides. Now let me demonstrate this rolling road in use with a couple of different types of engine. So here's I forget whether it's a Hornby Doubler or a Wren, but it's a 2-rail die-cast 8F, which hasn't been serviced, I might add. Well, not by me anyway. Sitting on this Hornby rolling road. You're really supposed to connect it up by putting wires into those terminals. You push the buttons down and then you can push wires in. I don't know how well those work. Sometimes those push terminals don't work all that well anyway. Plus, in any case, I don't have bare wires on the ends of my bench controller at the moment, so I've just clipped the crocodile clips to the rails, and that seems to work. That passes power through the rails and also to the rollers. The rollers have there's like steel rods inside that run on the rollers to power them on either side, and it's running quite nicely. It's a little bit more fiddly to adjust in some ways than the DCC. Well, it's much more stable and flat than trying to put a Loco on the DCC railers, but you do have to adjust the two sides separately, moving the roller on. The rollers on the two sides move completely independently of each other, so when you put one side in the right position to be under the wheels, that won't put the other side under the right position of the wheels. You have to adjust the other side separately. And then I've got that sliding block underneath the pony truck, and that's what's for. That's designed to go under a front pony truck or bogey. And really the only reason you'd even want to use rollers for that was if you had pickups on the front pony truck or whatever. I guess it would be worth putting it on a roller so it could pick up, but seems to work pretty well. I think it's definitely a better rolling road than the old one I had, which was basically the HMRS thing, but using DCC rollers. DCC rollers are nice, but in their way. But I think this provides a better rolling road, so this will probably be what I'll be using as a rolling road going forwards. So I just wanted to demonstrate a couple more things with this Hornby rolling road. For one thing, I have now plugged wires into those little terminals. Actually, I must say they do plug in and make a connection, but with wires this thin, they're kind of prone to falling right out again. The springs in that thing don't really create enough pressure to hold them in. Maybe they would with thicker wires. I'm not that wedded to this approach anyway. I just wanted to see if those connections work, and they certainly do work, basically. This is how you would typically put Pacific Loco on here. You put the 3 pairs of driving wheels on rollers there, you put the back pony truck on the upper level, and you support the front pony with that block. And you can put the tender on there, although you've barely got room for it. Actually, this would work without the tender. It's just passive. That tender's not actually doing anything, but I just put it on there for size so you could see. So you can just about fit a full-size Pacific with a tender on here, but it's a tight fit. Okay, and let's turn the power on. Famous lessons. And there you go. That does indeed operate. There's one way, and we go the other way, yes. Now this is a Wren, I think this one is, a die-cast coronation class. That's being City of London, right? Which has not been serviced, so I need to service it. The problem is, of course, that this approach is, of course, it's a 2-rail thing, so if you want to try and test 3-rail engines on this, it's a little trickier. Okay, now here is a 3-rail Duchess on the rolling road. This happens to be, famous last words, one that I renamed and renumbered as the Duchess of Sutherland. But other than that, I mean, it is basically just a standard 3-rail 00 Duchess of Athol. Now, because this is 3-rail, the way I'm connecting this is I've just got power connected to one of the side rails. I mean, technically, if I were really doing it ideally, it would be better if I connected to both the side rails, because of course the side rails are not connected to each other on this. But for the moment, I mean, I could do that in various ways. I could do that just by putting a little loop of wire into those, into those orange button connectors. If I just put a piece of wire from one of those to the others, that would connect the two sides together, but I haven't at the moment. I'm just connecting to one side rail. And then, I don't know whether you can see, but I've connected a crocodile and a clip, which is insulated, so it won't touch the roller there. I've connected an alligator clip underneath there to one of the center rail pickups under the engine. So if I turn the power on, famous last words, you've got to give it a bit of power, but there we go, there's that engine running. That's a 3-rail engine running on this. Rolling road, and we'll stop it and put it into reverse, all being well. There you go, yes. And I think we'll go back forwards. Famous last words, doesn't really matter which way you're going, but there you go. So, just a little tricky to work with the 3-rail, of course, because, you somehow got to manage to get power to the center rail pickups, which are generally going to be sort of underneath most engines. There's the old 3-rail engine, like, which has a wire. Maybe it goes to the tender, so you could connect the center rail power to that wire rather than having to fish underneath. For most of them, you've got to go underneath, but it's not so bad because there is sort of room underneath between the rollers. There's a fair bit, so you can see the other center rail pickup there. So why it stopped randomly now, I don't know. Probably wants servicing. Anyway, so that's about it, I think. I'm quite pleased to have got this Hornby rolling road. I do think it's better than what I was using before, and I will likely be using it when I want to run a locomotive on a rolling road.